Hi, my name is Liv, and welcome to Blade of Desire. My journey with heavy music has been obsessive, but also exciting for the past 2 or so years now. I didn't really know anything about heavy music when I started discovering hardcore and things like that, so I really started from the bottom up, and as someone who is a huge music nerd, that has been the most fun adventure to go on over the past 2 years and learn an entire genre and selection of bands and people and names and scenes and different subgenres. It's so much fun. I love music and I love learning all about it that I can. Recently, I've been really heavily into the genre of metalcore, and that's what I wanted to make a video about today. So today, I'm just going to be sitting down and telling you everything that I feel like I've learned so far about the genre and the people in it and the bands, the origins, what it all means. Everything that I've kind of collected, I want to share with you guys. And of course, I would like to say that this is on a very introductory level. I'm not claiming to really know much about this at all, and in fact, I know that I don't know much about this genre at all, but I just think it's interesting what I have learned and what I have listened to so far, and I would love it to share it with you guys. So yeah. Metalcore is defined as a fusion genre that mixes hardcore punk and extreme metal into one sound. The sound is polished and it's structured linearly. There's also a really heavy emphasis on slow and intense breakdowns, of course, for moshing purposes. This mosh-heavy influence is really critical to the sound of metalcore, and it's also, of course, known for its high-pitched vocals, too. The modern-day metalcore sound was very heavily influenced by Swedish bands of the 80s. These bands were more specifically death metal and hardcore bands, and they played a huge role in the American metalcore sound today. Some of the similarities include twin guitar harmonies, a mix of melodic and aggressive riffing, as well as a mix of harsh and cleaner, more melodic vocals. So the genre itself more so originated in the 80s. This is just to give a little bit more of a background because in today's video, I will be focusing mainly on bands and sounds from the 2000s. This genre also played a huge role in the development of the new wave of American heavy metal. This term was coined by Mark Hunter back in 2001, I believe is what I read. Okay, I'm gonna look down while I read this quote because there's no way I could ever memorize all of this. But the producers of the 2005 documentary, Metal: A Headbanger's Journey, have written about this movement, and I thought this quote was really interesting, so I wanted to include it. In essence, the new wave of American heavy metal can embody the seething aggression of the hardcore hormone, but play a type of acrobatic, precise, technical thrash death metal synthesis regularly touched by the melody of traditional metal, but often just briefly. Vocally, these bands huddle around Pantera-derived roar, leaning toward a death metal bark, but often with clean or sung vocals as ear candy, sometimes from a member of the band who is not the frontman. So I thought that was a really interesting quote and really summed metalcore up so well because it is such a divisive thing. 1 second of the song it is those lighter melodic vocals in a lot of bands, and then the next second it is really high-pitched screaming vocals. And I think that's really cool. It kind of just keeps you on your toes and you never know what to expect when it gets to the breakdown, and I think that's pretty awesome. Some of the main bands that people reference for this influence include At the Gates, In Flames, Dark Tranquillity, Haunted, and Refused. Surprised I remember those. These are some of the Swedish bands, though, that basically encouraged the American metalcore sound. So those bands kind of inspired bands like Unearth and Earth Crisis, for example. I also wanted to talk about some notable examples of albums from this time that were really important. So I kind of researched ones that were more well-known and then also some that were lesser known, maybe like cult classics kind of is what I was going for, just because I think it's cool to dig into the underground stuff just as much as the stuff that everyone's gonna know. Slaughter of the Soul by At the Gates. This album has a super heavy mix of melody and aggression. It has harmonized riffs and twin guitar leads, which I think is really cool. The album Used by Killswitch Engage. This album really popularized those harmonized guitar riffs and those leading songs, which I think is sick. And then the band Refused, and also just Swedish hardcore in general, had a huge emphasis on the development of metalcore. These bands kind of influenced more of the chaotic, intense side of metalcore. So when you think like mathcore, for example, so we're talking bands like Botched, Converge, Norma Jean, the Dillinger Escape Plan, all those kinds of bands, which personally I love. That is like my sweet spot is in metalcore, is like mathcore. Love that stuff. Okay, I wanted to read some more quotes because I just found a lot of good quotes when I was researching and I really wanted to share these. So let's start with one from Slaughter of the Soul. The time the album defined, 1995. The place, Gothenburg, Sweden. And the generations inspired, let's just say that without this landmark record, the entire new wave of Swedish death metal, bands like In Flames, Soilwork, and Arch Enemy, wouldn't be the same. And modern American metalcore, everyone from As I Lay Dying and Killswitch Engage to All That Remains and Black Dahlia Murder, wouldn't even exist. Which is a really crazy statement to make about just one album. Next, I have a quote about The Shape of Punk to Come, which is an album from Refused. In the ensuing years, the record became a reference point for all artists from all walks of life, be it Frank Turner's hardcore band Million Dead, a name borrowed from a Refused lyric, doing their best to take on that sound, Poison the Well, recording an album with the Shape of Punk to Come's producers, Paramore inserting Refused lyrics into the song Born for This, or Mike Shinoda of Linkin Park saying there wouldn't be a Linkin Park without Refused. This band from Sweden made a massive impact on nearly every facet of rock music, which is so cool. Imagine having that impact in the music community. I think that's so awesome. So at this point, by the time we reach the 2000s, America is working really hard to develop its own distinct metalcore sound. Because it's the 2000s, we have things like social media, MySpace. The genre is really heavily prevalent on MySpace, I believe, which is something that I kind of wanted to research and make a separate video about in and of itself, because I think that's a cool concept. But social media did have a really big impact on the development of this genre in the 2000s. Despite trying to stand out, the genre did remain pretty similar to what it had already sounded like. Dissonant chords, twin guitar riffs, and high vocals are still some of the most distinct sounds today in metalcore, so you can see that not really much had changed from the start of it until what it was in the 2000s. And some of the main bands during this time specifically were Earth Crisis, As I Lay Dying, Prayer for Cleansing, which is a personal favorite of mine right now. I cannot stop listening to them, and then also Killswitch Engage. I also wanted to include some examples of bands that have said before that they took a really big influence from bands like Refused and other Swedish hardcore bands. So some of those include Trivium, Bullet for My Valentine, All That Remains, Darkest Hour, and Still Remains. And this part is also where I get to kind of those like cult classics that I wanted to talk about. And once again, I have a limited and narrow perspective on the community of metalcore, hardcore music in general. So if these are extremely well known and I'm totally incorrect, that is fine, because that very well could be the case, and that's okay. I will take that L. But what I researched, some of the ones that appeared to seem like a cult classic to the scene would be these. First, we have Prayer for Cleansing and their album The Rain and Endless Fall. Nodes of Ranvier and their album Lost Senses, More Innocence. For Dire Life's Sake and their album Dance, Pretend, Forget. And then also Winter Solstice with their album The Fall of Rome. Something that I also found really interesting when I was researching metalcore and the genre was the prevalence of band tropes almost. There was a few websites that I used to research that kind of referenced these tropes, and I thought they were kind of silly and interesting, so I wanted to share them. Long-haired pretty boy, male band female singer, and Quincy punk were all terms that kind of seemed relative through all these websites. Of course, the first two examples are pretty self-explanatory. Long-haired pretty boy, female singer, male band, you get it. But some examples of these include Asking Alexandria, We Came as Romans, and then male bands but female singers are of course bands like Spirit Box and also Dying Wish. Another thing that really stuck out to me when I was researching metalcore was the prevalence of Christian-based bands. Didn't know that was such a thing in the metalcore community. I knew that was really a thing, religious stuff with like heavy metal, death metal, but didn't know that was like a thing in metalcore. So some bands that are Christian that maybe you don't know include The Devil Wears Prada, Under Oath, As I Lay Dying, Norma Jean has religious elements. Those are all great examples of bands that have Christian elements in their music, which you may not have known because I definitely did not for most of those. So I kind of skipped over Quincy Punk, but I wanted to go back to it because one of the last things that I want to talk about is the interesting, not debate, but just discourse, I guess, that is online about metalcore and violence at shows and venues. And of course, this is something you're going to see with any sort of heavy music, moshing and having that excitement and that grit at shows is just kind of part of the genre. But like I said, I think it's just interesting to read up on the past and find little tidbits of information. So here's what I found. Let's take a look. So a lot of venues I found actually refuse to book any metalcore bands at all, like regardless of who they are. If they are in the metalcore genre, they will not book them because of the prevalence of fighting and things that happened at shows, the venue getting destroyed, things like that. An example that I did find of this that I thought was interesting was this Milwaukee venue called the Borg Ward, and I think in 2016 the band Knocked Loose actually played a show there. It was Kingmaker's last show, and during this show the venue, I guess the crowd was really intense and there was a lot of moshing and violence going on, and shortly thereafter that is when the venue posted, I believe on Facebook, that they were no longer going to be hosting metalcore genre bands anymore, which is so, I don't know, it's so interesting to me that a music venue can just do that. And I guess if a crowd isn't being respectful, then, that is part of it and they have to respect their space. But I do think that's just a really interesting concept to see how venues are able to go in and change their crowds and change what shows they can even have. And with this last little piece, this is where Quincy Punk, that stereotype that I was talking about earlier, comes into play. So I wanted to explain what this meant exactly because from what I researched, it goes back into a little bit of like hardcore lore, which I thought was interesting. If this is even correct in the first place, I hope that it is. I really do. So Quincy Punk was a scene in the metalcore community that originated in Quincy, Massachusetts. The scene was super DIY and super underground, and there was a lot of competition between the Boston scene and the Quincy scene because the Boston, of course, with it being just a bigger city in general, had more population and had more people at their shows. For years, Quincy Punk came to be used in the Southern Californian punk scene to describe a punk who cares more about their rebellious image than anything else. Okay, my friends, I really hope that you enjoyed today's video, and I hope that you learned something or maybe found this interesting. I don't know, I love to learn about music and music genres and the songs and the bands and the lore and how everything started. I think it's so interesting, so I hope maybe you guys found this interesting too. And of course, I'll be back very soon with a new video. Very excited. I think it's going to be a fashion video next. So I hope you guys enjoyed. And as always, I will see you in the next one. Bye.